Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small business and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 79 of Small Business War Stories. I'm your host, Pablo Fuentes, and today I stopped in Bozeman, Montana, and I interviewed a very, very unique business. This is a guy named Robert Keith from Beartooth Capital. And what they do is they buy and restore ranches. So think about this. Like sometimes people buy and restore a house or a car. No, they take ranches in the American West and they basically restore them and they fix things that are wrong with them and then sell them. And that is a really, really cool, interesting business that I really was fascinated to learn about. And I think you will learn some really cool things too about the Montana, Wyoming, and like general Rocky Mountain area and what they're doing in that area. This episode was a part of the Soul of America tour, and as such, it is brought to you by FreshBooks. FreshBooks is small business accounting and bookkeeping software, and they help you run all the things in the background that help you run your business better. They calculate the amount of time. They save you an enormous amount of time every single year, and they also have you basically have come tax season, all of your invoices, all of your things are ready for you. You don't have to go and like recalculate anything. They help you collect money from people who owe you money and put out invoices. And they are a great, great tool to help you run the finances of your business. So go check out FreshBooks, freshbooks.com/war stories, and tell them that you learned about them on Small Business War Stories. And like every episode of Small Business War Stories, this episode is brought to you by Proven.com. That is a company I started, and it is a small business hiring software tool. Will help you organize all of your hiring and be successful with it. Distribute your job to lots of job boards. Collaborate with your team. Generally, kick ass and do well. And we also have a great, great set of resources at blog.proven.com that will help you run all aspects of your business better. So we had published lots of different articles about different things you can do, and that's where all the episodes, the Small Business War Stories episodes, live. So go check it out at blog.proven.com, and also if you need to hire, check out proven.com. Without further ado, let's get into episode 79 with Robert Keith of Beartooth Capital in Bozeman, Montana. And we are live here, and we are here in a beautiful morning in Bozeman, Montana, and I have the pleasure to sit down with Robert Keith of Beartooth Group.
Good morning, Pablo. Thanks for being here.
It's so great to be here. Thank you for being on the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So you are a very different guest than we've ever had on the show, and I think that makes you awesome. That makes you special.
Probably many other things.
You are... I don't want to say your thunder, but you're essentially running an investment group that finds and restores ranches all along the West. Is that a good kind of one-sentence description?
It's a good one-sentence description. If I were going to add anything, I'd say we're looking for distressed properties.
Okay.
Distressed often in the form they've been mined. There's hazardous materials still on them. The river's been straightened, wetlands have been drained, something negative has been done to the environment. That's what we look for. We buy those properties, we restore them, fix the problem and a number of other problems that we uncover along the way, and then we resell them.
So you are like basically the Western ranch version of somebody finding a 1966 Mustang in a garage in Michigan and full of rust and then restoring it and making it mint.
Great analogy. Another one would be we're looking for the worst house in a great neighborhood, fixing that up and reselling it.
Very cool. How did this come about? I mean, it's an awesome idea. It's not one I'd heard of before, and it's not one that had occurred to me. So how did this come about?
I think a lot of people thought of it as you did, whether it be the car or the house. You know, that part's pretty logical. A lot of people have seen that before, but on a large Western ranch, that's been rarely done. And I spent time in New York at Morgan Stanley doing investment banking work, and the West Coast doing venture capital work. Yet my family lived in Cody, Wyoming.
Okay.
And that's really where my heart was. And it was through the span of being a ranch owner as part of the family for 15, 20 years and seeing various projects we did on our own ranch, neighbors' projects, et cetera, that made the real estate more valuable. At the same time, they were making financial returns. So an environmental return and a financial return that really went hand in hand. And that's when kind of the aha light went off in my head, where I thought, holy smokes, you can actually make this land more valuable from both a real estate perspective, a financial perspective, and environmental perspective.
Yeah, there's a big social environmental component to that. I mean, if you, I guess, given that you see the environment as a social good, which I do, there's a big, social component to that.
Absolutely. If you're restoring elk habitat on your property, those elk don't live on your property. They're going to migrate to the neighbors and around to the public land, et cetera. So same with fish. You restore a section of creek or river, that's going to provide spawning habitat for fish that are going to populate that entire river system. Amazing story. We did a project in Idaho, central Idaho, in the Sun Valley area, in fact, and salmon made it over 11 major dams in the Columbia River to get to this property in central Idaho, only to die before they could spawn. We removed some barriers, did a bunch of habitat restoration, and all of a sudden the next year there were, I think it was 30 times as many salmon that were able to make it up to spawn right there.
Wow.
So that's absolutely a public good, moving all the way from the coast to inland Idaho.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What was the first project that so just walk me through, you are here in Cody, you're seeing what's happening, you're seeing this opportunity. What was the first kind of test where you're like, you know what, we're going to give this a shot? Did you use your own money for that? Did you use other people's money? How did you test the idea?
Well, the slightly longer version is I was happily employed at a venture job in Silicon Valley, kind of living the dream of every business school graduate. And I had a buddy from business school who had started a firm doing this type of work, the ranch restoration work. And I literally had breakfast with him one morning, and he described one of the projects they were working on, and I just said, that is so much lower risk. It has not quite the same level of financial return, but way lower risk, commensurately higher return compared to that level of risk, and it's doing something good for the world at the same time. I basically talked him into being my partner there, and we were partners for about 8 years. We split about 4 years ago now, but that was the view from the venture world into the ranch restoration real estate world. What we ended up doing is raising a pool of capital. Some of it, a heck of a lot of it, in fact, lived off our own savings for about a year there, and then raised a pool of capital from primarily wealthy individuals who believed that you could buy ranch real estate in a distressed state for a distressed price, fix it up, restore it, and then resell it and make a profit. Mm-hmm. And that's where the initial capital came from. Okay.
And what was the very first project you did?
Probably the first large-scale project we did was one called the River Y Ranch. We renamed it the River Y Ranch after a famous book by David James Duncan. This is in kind of central Montana. And literally, the river had been channeled into a ditch by about 35 years ago. A former rancher had decided it was easier to mow straight lines in his field. Thus, he literally moved the river. I met the fellow, and he described how he'd done this at night to avoid the Army Corps of Engineers finding him and finding him.
Yep.
And so it's been done totally illegally, and yet there it was. And yet we knew that downstream there was great fishing. And so thanks to some partners, we learned of the opportunity. We bought the property, and we did a massive river restoration effort. We created about a mile of river by putting it in meanders or winding path versus a straight line. That created a huge amount of habitat for fish, did a whole bunch of planting of willows, grasses, trees, et cetera, on the sides of the banks too.
Yeah.
So that created then a whole bunch of habitat for raptors. All of a sudden you had this whole cycle of wildlife returning to what had been really a barren, dry, devoid of grass, straight riverbank.
Yeah, and things kind of feed each other, right? I don't know if you've seen the video about wolves coming back to the area, right? And then the effect that had. So
it's all a cycle. It's all a cycle, absolutely. Yeah. And then in one of the cooler parts of this cycle, and I joke with our downstream neighbor now, but there's a huge flooding event about a year later. And had we left the river in the shape it was in, it would have been like a fire hose aimed right at this guy's downstream property and his house on the riverbanks. But instead of, with all the curvature that was now in the river system that slowed down the water, took all the energy out of the system, and he had a nice, calm river flowing by his place instead of having a massive flood event.
Wow.
So in the industry, people refer to those as ecosystem services, but we provided an ecosystem service for the public good, for him, for the insurance companies, whoever else would have had to foot that bill.
Wow. How do you? I have so many questions. How do you find?
Fire away.
How do you find properties? What is your process for that? I mean, it's got to be a little bit like going to like treasure hunting at at estate sales or something like that.
It is. It's a little bit like that. Yeah. We're looking for a combination of distress in the form of the property. And unfortunately, there's quite a number of those out there that have been mined, that have been dredged. Something's been massively changed.
So what are the main things you see? You see mines, dredging. What are the kind of like major categories of distress?
We've done gold mine, tailing pile cleanup. We've done coal mining cleanup. Hazardous chemicals. See a lot of hazardous chemicals. Back in the day, in order to waterproof fence posts, you use diesel fuel and other nasty chemicals with which to dip those posts. And oftentimes those vats or those drums spilled. And so that needs to get cleaned up. So we see that a lot. That's kind of the hazardous chemical mining area. We often see habitat changes, and that's the straightened river system. Mm-hmm. That's the wetland that's been drained, and so it's no longer a functional wetland anymore. We see lots of things like that. We've also started to see more. We took down a subdivision, actually, outside Jackson Hole.
Wow.
So it was kind of a half-finished development where during 2008 downturn, the developer run into trouble and basically just left everything half-finished. So we had about 12 foundations on 12 different cabins on this property, and it just was a complete eyesore and just a total mess of the place. So we came in and literally spent over $1 million demoing all that stuff, hauling it off to the dump, et cetera, and creating what now is a beautiful, picturesque kind of rolling hillside with a gorgeous.
And that was better than, say, finishing those cabins?
Absolutely. The market probably was never right for a subdivision right there. And yet, with the downturn in 2008, the market was certainly not right. Instead of selling to 12 different buyers, instead the property was more suitable for a single buyer or maybe two buyers, two families that knew each other, one single family.
Yeah.
Much more valuable to them to have their privacy, et cetera, versus share it with 11 other folks.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Cool. So tell me more about this process. How do you find I
never answered that one, did I?
What's that?
I never answered the secret sauce question. How do you find it?
Yeah.
Traditionally, traditional manner.
Well, by the way, before you continue, sure, it can be the secret sauce, but the real secret sauce is the work and the actual doing it, right? So you can tell people exactly what you do, and the fact that you go out and actually do it.
This is true. Yeah. What I will say is we have a bit of a competitive advantage in that we've been in the market now for, I think it's 12, 13 years.
Sure.
And so we've bought and sold a lot of properties.
So people know you.
People know us. More importantly, we've paid or caused to be paid a lot of different folks, i.e. if there's a broker involved, they've generated a commission thanks to us. And there are brokers out there who've made $1 million off our transactions over that period of time. So we should be getting first notice,
so you get phone
look
calls,
at those
is what
properties.
you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That helps a lot.
But early on, you didn't have that.
Early on, we didn't have that, and so that's more challenging. You got to do more looking, more finding, et cetera. Lately,
this is not driving around. This is more like research, like
it might result in driving around.
Okay.
It could be a public search of records of someone sadly who's passed away or something like that. There's a medical issue. We haven't really gone that far yet, but we may identify a particular geography that we really like a lot. Within that geography, then we'll identify certain areas, smaller areas, subsets of that geography where we have a particular desire because there's a creek that could be restored there. There's a problem. And so in that case, we'll actually literally go door to door to ask if folks have an interest in selling. More often, it's a connection through a connection, whether it's a banker we know, an appraiser we know, literally a friend we know who knows someone who says, you know what, I'm done. I want to sell my place, and I've had it on the market or haven't had it on the market, but I'm out of time. And whether that's because of leverage issues, a death in the family, health issues, somehow they need money. We're in a market that's fairly illiquid, so you can't simply magic up money out of thin air when you need it.
So if you need to sell your ranch, that's probably a little bit tougher than selling a condo.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it depends where you are, and it depends when you are as well. '08, of course, '09, that might have been easier to sell your ranch than your condo. But on a daily basis, there's no quoted price for ranch properties. And in fact, to take that one step further, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and some of the other states we work in are non-disclosure states, which literally means there's no public record of what that property sold for.
Ooh.
Yeah, which, excuse me, for us, when we do repeated transaction, that's a great thing because we aggregate information across the whole landscape on what things have sold for, what they've been acquired for, versus your single buyer who's a little bit in the dark, your single seller who's a bit in the dark on what their place ought to sell for. So you often end up with kind of a standoff between a buyer who, of course, thinks it's worth a lot less than the seller does, but with very little information to go on.
Okay, cool. So what's your scope? So you mentioned you're based here in Montana, so I'm sure you do properties here. Montana, Wyoming, you mentioned Idaho, Colorado?
We've done 2 deals in Idaho or in Colorado, yep.
Okay, and then anything else?
We did one in New Mexico and one in California.
Okay. Oregon, never?
Haven't touched anything in Oregon yet.
Okay, cool. But that's not outside of the realm of possibility.
Nope. No, we've looked. Haven't found the right place.
Got it. Okay. So, and then what's the scope in terms of acreage? And how many of these places, I'm sure, so you mentioned Jackson Hole. As we were discussing before the show, Jackson Hole is not an inexpensive place to acquire property. So that's probably a very expensive ranch. But then you mentioned central Montana. Well, certainly on a pound-for-pound basis, that's probably less expensive. But then on an absolute basis, I guess I'm trying to get a gauge for, do you have to be a multi-billionaire in order to afford one of these ranches? And who are the people who mostly buy these?
Yeah, so the first part of your question, we've paid $25,000 per acre for a place near Jackson Hole. We've paid $300 an acre for Central Idaho property. So for us, the delta between what we can buy it for, what we put into it, and then what we can sell it for is the key.
Okay.
And that could be a 160-acre, very small property in Jackson Hole, or it could be a many thousand-acre ranch in Central Idaho. The key just is that we can buy it well. There's something or some things we can do to it that really add value to it, result in a much higher sale price.
Okay.
As far as where we work, then all the way from central Montana, 11 western states, what we say, Montana through all the way down to California. That said, we have certain favorite geographies. Those are the geographies where your buyer question comes home, and that is we're looking for a mismatch between supply and demand. Good old-fashioned economics. There are finite amounts of land that's available for purchase. Jackson Hole is a perfect example. 98% of Teton County, which Jackson Hole is in, is publicly owned, meaning it's Forest Service, it's BLM, it's state. It is not available for you or me or any member of of the public to purchase. So all of the demand that's coming from, you name it, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, primarily Texas as well, is being driven onto only 2% of that land area.
Yeah.
And so if you...
That seems crazy. I mean, I'm going to Jackson after this.
Yep.
That seems a little bit excessive with all the amount of land that's around everywhere else. It's just like a matter of cachet, I guess, and brand that people want to say they go to Jackson Hole.
Well, I'm not going to comment on why Jackson Hole's so sought after, but the Teton view is fantastic.
Okay.
That's where my family got our start. Literally, and this is where a lot of buyers get their start. Not necessarily Jackson Hole, but we took a Western vacation as a family, and it grew from 2 days to 2 weeks over time, just because we fell in love with the area. At the time, there weren't cell phones, but nowadays you can set the cell phone aside and spend quality family time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the answer to your buyer question.
Okay.
The buyers of these properties, wherever they may be from, are really looking for that experience with family, with friends, that you really cannot get anywhere else, meaning they think of these properties as a legacy property. They're going to be hiking on this until the day they die, and then their kids are going to inherit it. They're going to be horseback riding. They're going to be hunting. Whatever their pursuits might be. Fishing, probably the most common one, fly fishing here in the West. But it becomes a multi-generational place where you have legitimate downtime. And what's important in life is front and center.
Yeah.
And everything else can wait. And I really think that is what draws people to this
What
area.
percentages would you say are primary residencies versus second homes or something like that?
Very few start as primary residences, but as time goes on, that number increases. Meaning, For instance, the Yellowstone Club nearby, we're sitting in Bozeman here, Yellowstone Club in Big Sky. There's a growing number every year of folks who buy a home there and then start to look for a ranch. They want not the small 40 acres or 10 acres or a small home site, but they want the 1,600 acres. They want the 2,000 acres.
Okay.
And they may or may not become residents, but they start to spend more and more time here.
Okay. So educate me, because in my mind, this may paint me as a city slicker that I am. 40 acres sounds like quite a bit.
Yep.
But that's small in your world. So what is the kind of lower end of what's considered a ranch?
Most people would probably pick something like 500 acres as the starting point. Maybe 640 acres. That's 1 square mile. 640 acres. So that may be a starting point, but here's an interesting way to look at it. So we sold a ranch, I guess it's about a year ago now, and it was to a fellow from Silicon Valley, tech executive. We sold the ranch for, let's say, right around $3 million range. Yeah. And he said, this is fascinating because I could buy a home in Palo Alto, maybe for this amount of money, probably not a very nice home. Yeah. But here I am getting almost 400 acres. There's deer everywhere. There's pheasants everywhere. There's ducks. There's geese. Wildlife is everywhere. And I can't see my neighbor. What more can I ask for? And where would you rather spend your money, on that 3 million acre postage stamp or a big broad place where you got wildlife everywhere?
Don't get me started on the Bear. I mean, yeah.
I live there too, so no worries.
That place is crazy, man. Place not for the right reasons. Well, some right reasons. Very cool. Let's talk about social impact. So you guys are a B corporation.
You bet.
What does that mean to you? And you have also a great, I wanted to touch upon it earlier, but this is a good time to talk about it. You talk about your motto is connecting people to the American West. How does that tie to being a B corporation, and what does that mean for you guys to be a socially? So actually, maybe we should explain real quick what a B corporation is and how you guys tie into that. Well, go ahead, go for it.
Sure. So let me take this almost in reverse order. So connecting people to the American West. That's what happened in my family. I described that earlier. We came out for a family vacation, fell in love with the area because it allowed us to be together in a way we weren't anywhere else. Mm-hmm. I want to connect other people in that same fashion and allow them that same opportunity to form those bonds, really, through those experiences that they have only on a ranch property. Different than the Hawaii condo, different than any of those other things. And so I want to make that connection. And we want to make that connection to the people who are going to care and love those properties, who are going to continue the restoration work we do, who are going to manage it for wildlife and for agricultural purposes. We do a lot of organic work. Have certified several properties as organic, worked with organic bison, organic sheep, organic beef, et cetera. So that's important to us. And circling now back to your B Corp question, I don't even remember how many years ago, but B Corp was very new. Nobody else in Montana was doing it. And one of our employees said, hey, we should really think about doing this. And I said, of course, financial guy. I said, well, what's the downside? What, how much is it going to cost? What all this kind of stuff. And the point is,
can you give us a 15-second synopsis of what a B Corp is?
Yes, benefit corp as compared to a traditional corporation. And the idea is you are taking stakeholders beyond simply your shareholders into consideration, employees, customers, et cetera. That's the very simple definition.
Okay. And stakeholders could be community members and also like other people down the river, like you said.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So it's basically trying to create positive externalities.
Yeah, it's that whole cycle we were talking about earlier, I think.
Cool.
And in excuse me, in our case, that is, as you described, it's not only the professionals who are doing the restoration work on the property we work with, mm-hmm. It is the neighbor downstream. It is the person from California who comes up to fish for a week and catches one of the fish that exists because they could spawn on the habitat we created. So there are huge externalities like that. The biggest one I think is really in the climate change realm because of so much of our work revolves around water. And whether that be restoration of wetlands, river systems, et cetera, that all has to do with warming water systems, clean water systems, flooding control, et cetera. Not to mention all the agricultural components that we work on, the organic nature of the grazing programs we put together for livestock, as well as just traditional farming programs, et cetera. So back to the B Corp question, and when probably 10 or so years ago when an employee brought this up, I asked what are the issues with it, and the individual said, well, we're already doing all of this anyways. we're looking after our people. They're participating in the upside from a financial standpoint. We have all the policies and procedures in place where, whether it be maternity leave or paternity leave, all these different elements you get scored for B Corp on, they're already in place. So why would we not do this? And so we went ahead and did it. I think for us, it's been most valuable in attracting employees. Every once in a while, an investor asks, but generally it's more of an employee end of things.
Okay. And how many employees you guys have?
We are 3 today.
3, but then you also, are all the restoration crews and anything like that, that's on a contract basis?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, but that, you have a positive impact on jobs through that, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. So you employ 3 people here, but also what is the bigger impact on jobs through the restoration projects?
You bet. So, we bought a place near West Yellowstone almost 2 years ago now, and we've spent about $600,000 restoring that place.
Okay.
And that is from demolition of decrepit old structures to rehabilitating creeks, ponds, wetlands, et cetera. And so that is directly tied to a company that employs about 10 individuals that did that restoration work. I think, the more indirect nature is they came and stayed on the property, spent money locally, and are, quite frankly, making the place a whole heck of a lot more attractive.
Yep.
That will make anybody who visits West Yellowstone get less of an eyesore on the way in and more of a beautiful setting.
Okay.
I don't know how to trace that externality. But absolutely, we spend quite a bit of money on restoring these places, and the result is some of that ends up in the local communities.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. What are some of the oddest, wackiest things you've seen? I'm sure you have come across some wild stuff.
That I have. I think I'm in a really unique market to see wacky stuff, and that's partly because we're dealing on one end of the political spectrum sometimes with very conservative ranchers that are multi-generational, and then marry that with the wide-eyed, tree-hugging Silicon Valley type, and all of a sudden you have just often very wonderful connections.
Okay.
And that's really neat to see because both of those groups care about the land and the wildlife.
They have more in common than they think.
They have way more in common than they realize. So I feel really lucky that in this time of complete polarization, we're actually able to see a lot of coming together around a river restoration, or around taking down an old fencing thing that's in everybody's way, and it's a beautiful thing to see again, especially in today's day and age. Yeah, it doesn't mean we don't see some wacky stuff. Some of my favorites have probably been an individual, very wealthy individual who bought a ranch, and he wanted to have the largest window in the world to frame his view of the mountains.
Okay.
So he bought a glass factory. As anyone would do, of course.
Yeah.
If there's not a factory out there to make a big enough window, you buy a glass factory and create your own window.
Yeah, I did that once. No.
Yeah, exactly. Haven't we all? And unfortunately, in the sad way things go, sometimes the truck train, I don't know what it was, carrying this largest pane of glass in the world, broke the pane of glass on the way to his ranch.
How large a pane of glass are we talking about?
I have no idea.
So you have to do the research. What is the current largest pane of glass?
Yeah, exactly.
I want a bigger one.
Figure it out.
Jesus.
But so you've got everything from that to the.
So did they redo it?
The second pane of glass made it unscathed and made it into the ranch house.
Wow. Have you seen this pane of glass?
I have. I didn't take the time to measure it, though.
Okay, but it's impressive, I presume.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
I understand the motivation for that. I would never spend my money that way.
Yeah.
But the beautiful views of the snow-capped peaks, particularly this time of year, with the beautiful green grass leading up to it and the river and the base of the hills, there's something almost primal that calls to you there. And
sure.
Why not, frame it with the largest pane of glass in the world if you could?
Sounds good. Anything else? Anything else wild and crazy you've seen out there?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you've run across characters, right? It's so who are some of the characters that you bought a property from, kind of like straight out of a movie?
Yeah, you bet. Well, sitting here in 2017, approaching 2018, we still work with real estate brokers, some of whom are not on the internet. It's a very inefficient market, which is one of the things I love about it. But one of these characters, I brought a fellow with me to a restoration consultant to take a peek at a ranch, and he was wearing a big straw hat. And this rancher did not believe in straw hats, as you'll soon find out. And so his opening comments, we get out of the car, and this rancher's opening comment was, "I'd rather see my sister in a cat house than wear a hat like that."
All right, nice to meet you too, man.
Exactly. No pretenses, just lay it right out there.
Okay, so if you want to be legit in the West, wear a felt hat.
Yep.
Actually, straw hats are big in Texas. It gets hot.
Well, it's hot there a lot. Yeah, this is northern Montana. So
Yeah, so not in northern Montana.
Apparently not,
Okay, I wonder what the straw hat line is.
Right, yeah, exactly. We'll have to do some research on that one, too.
Exactly.
Largest pane of glass that you can view your straw hat through.
Very cool. What do you, so how long, you've been doing this for a while now. How long has it been?
Like 12 or 13 years now.
Yeah, 12, 13 years. So what's your number one lesson that you've learned in doing this that you can maybe transmit to people who are thinking about setting out there and starting their own venture? You took a leap. It's worked out very well, but you took a leap from something that was ostensibly safer as a career path, very lucrative, and decided to do this. What's your kind of number one lesson that you've gotten from that?
Yeah, you bet. I often share this thought with folks that are considering it, but it's understand your level of tolerance for risk.
Okay.
And that can be taken a number of different directions. What I primarily mean is financially and emotionally. So if you're thinking about starting your own thing, literally figure out what your runway is. What's the burn rate? How many months, years, if you're lucky, is that going to last you? And then what's going to happen then? But also the emotional stress, particularly if you're in a relationship. I'm very fortunate that I have a fantastic wife, fantastic family that supported me through this whole process, start to finish. However, it probably wouldn't have worked without that.
Yeah.
If I had a wife who was concerned about money and constantly asking me questions about that, it would have been much harder. I probably would have stayed with a more secure job.
Yeah.
But if you got that support, just understand.
Or if you don't have a wife.
Yeah. Just understand your level of emotional tolerance for doing something different where you need to assume you're not going to get paid for a while.
Okay.
And how long can you make it?
Yeah.
And then figure out if it's a year, then what's going to happen in a year? Are you trying to get a job back where you were? Are you going to tweak the business model, pivot? What happens then at that first yardstick?
Cool. Can you think of a time when things went really wrong? When things just went sideways on either a project or your business, and what did you do about it?
Of course, any entrepreneur tells you no. They're full of it.
They're lying.
Yeah. Many things go wrong. Little things, big things. What's
a big one? Tell me a big one.
Well, the big one for us was really that whole 2007, 08, downturn in every market there was, particularly driven by real estate. So here we are, we're raising money for our first fund in 2006 and 2007, and we're deploying the heck out of it in 2007, 2008, and massive crash comes along.
So you're stuck with a lot of inventory.
We're stuck with a lot of inventory. Thank goodness we have very patient investors who supported us along the way. We came out of it fine, survived, but there's a number of years, particularly in this market, where things just went quiet, and it was really hard to put together transactions. Now, our business model is somewhat advantaged as compared to the standard real estate business model because we could do conservation transactions, the sale of development rights, the sale of parcels to conservation groups, et cetera.
What is development rights? I'm not familiar with that.
So take that Jackson Hole property that we talked about earlier, and you could put 12 homes on there. You have the right through the planning and zoning department to put 12 homes on there today. Let's say we could sell off several of those rights, maybe half of them, or 10 of them, let's say, and be paid in cash, sometimes tax deduction, but in order to do that. And so we did more of that as part of our business model, of course, is to protect these landscapes. And so we did more of that during the downturn to generate liquidity at a time when there's very little liquidity in the market.
Got it. So trying to squeeze water out of a rock, basically, or proverbial water out of a rock, and trying to get other financial assets out of properties other than selling them.
Yeah, it's an overused phrase, but people often describe real estate as a bundle of sticks. And that bundle of sticks is composed of the land that we all think of course, but then there's also mineral rights underneath it. There's mineral rights on the surface, whether that be gravel, coal underneath. And then one of those rights is the right to develop and develop in a certain way. And so you are able to, in certain areas, certain geographies with certain partners, to sell some of those rights.
Okay.
Interesting way to create cash where otherwise you wouldn't.
Let me ask you a question. So what happens if you restore a property and then somebody finds that there's some kind of mineral called gold, something that they that's more valuable in the land itself underneath? What happens?
Depends if you own those rights to that valuable mineral underneath. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. If you do not, that company or individuals then that hire the company or work with the company in order to extract that gold, they have the right to get in there and do it if you don't have the mineral rights. You can own the surface right, put your home right there. Colorado's going through this right now big time with fracking. You got subdivisions built on top of areas where fracking companies own the mineral rights underneath, and they're coming in and they're extracting.
Wow.
Yeah, so it can happen. It's called a separation of the estates. Mineral rights go one way and owned by one group individual.
That sounds terrible to have a house on top of something that's going to become a mine.
Well, back to your question, it gets down to due diligence. Do your homework.
Okay.
And so in our case, we will do analyses before we acquire anything that tells us who owns what. And sometimes we own those rights, and if we don't own those rights, the right to extract minerals underneath, we will hire a geologist then to come in and tell us how likely it is that somebody else would come in and extract those mineral rights. And so if they say there's no chance in heck this is ever going to get extracted, we get okay with that. But if they say, there's a reasonable chance someone's going to come in here and make a play on those mineral rights, we don't touch that.
What percentage of properties have this kind of split between
Split estate? Most of them.
Most of them?
Most ranch properties in the West.
Wow, that's not something I would have thought.
Well, it happened because you've got old-time ranch families who, held on to the mineral estate when they sold off the land in hopes that someday they'd get rich through the sale of oil or something like that. Same thing with then companies who, for very low cost, can come in and buy those rights, option them even, do a little exploration, and all of a sudden, voila, they find something, and off they go.
So it's rare that you're able to find a property where you own both.
That's correct.
Wow, that's a risk. That's a huge risk.
It's a huge risk. It's a huge risk that usually you can set aside because most areas of the West are not getting minerals extracted from them. There are certain areas that are. And so if you're anywhere near those areas or areas where they're known to be sources underground of those minerals, whatever they may be, be tread very carefully.
But also things change. So, for example, this is something I learned recently during a road trip. There's a lot of uranium in Navajo Nation, right? And uranium was, in the early 1900s, like nobody cared about uranium. And in the mid 1900s, people really cared about uranium. Sure. And then that became a thing, and the environmental impact of that was terrible.
Yep.
So things can change all the time. So just because, so how do you think about that?
Well, you try and quantify what you can.
Yeah.
And understand what is underneath. When we hire a geologist to do that type of search, they're looking at every known mineral, and then how merchantable it is, how saleable it is. And you're absolutely right. If one found uranium on one of these places today, you'd probably say, well, that's not that big a deal. But you never know. So then you might want to look at how much of it is there. And is there enough where it's actually going to be worth someone's time to get in there and extract? So
right. So just because there's something underneath, there could be copper, there could be gold.
But uranium's in a lot of places. Throughout Colorado, for instance.
Yeah, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah. Yeah, there's a lot of it.
Absolutely right. So
there's that. They're actually I just found there are actual mines right next to the north rim of the Grand Canyon, like real deal active uranium mines right now, which is insane to me.
Yeah. Yes, this is true.
So okay, interesting. I had no idea about this whole. So actually, related to that, how do you ensure? Once you sell a property, that all the work you've done is not going to be for naught, meaning that you're not going to sell it to somebody who's then going to be like, oh, I'm going to take the river back to the straight path.
Yeah, probably three ways. One is that example I described earlier, Central Montana, with the river. The guy did it illegally in the first case to make it straight.
Yeah.
So that would not be accomplishable in today's day and age.
Sure.
So that part's easy. The second part is legally, and there's a number of ways you can legally constrain a future owner's hands. One is through a deed restriction.
Okay. What does that mean?
It simply means that you remove certain things from the deed of that property. So one could be extracting timber. One could be farming a certain way. You simply say, as I sell to you, you cannot do this in this fashion. Some people in the West will do that on cattle ranch and say, can't have more than blank number of cattle in the place. Very similar tool, but not a deed restriction, is called a conservation easement. And that is what we talked about a little bit earlier in the sale of development rights. It can impact more than just the development rights, but it's a legally binding tool that travels with the title, the deed to that property that says you may not put more than blank homes. You may only graze so many cattle, things like that. Pick your issue.
Right.
And there are some funky ones out there. There are crazy ones that say you can only ever graze buffalo on this property. There are others that say you can do anything but no more than one home. They're crafted
who comes up with those rules?
Well, the owner of the property at the time that this is put on, of course, and a conservation group. Sometimes it's a government entity, but usually it's a land trust, local land trust, such as Nature Conservancy, Montana Land Reliance, Gallup Valley Land Trust, et cetera, in this part of the world.
Cool.
And they work together to protect the key resources on that property. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful way to pass a property on, to sell it, and know that forever it will never be developed in a certain way.
Okay.
And so a lot of families will undertake these if they end up selling the place because the kids don't want to come home, something like that.
Okay.
They can know that there's never going to be a subdivision on top of the family ranch. They
makes
sell the
sense.
ranch, but there's never going to be a subdivision, a parking lot, whatever.
Cool.
A third way just is simply back to your first question, we connect people to the American West. We're trying to find the right buyers for these places.
Okay.
And the wonderful thing about the market we're in is that I described the Silicon Valley tech executive who bought the place. He bought the place because he loves wildlife. And he loves the fact that he can grow some organic hay on his place. And then that means he can run organic livestock on his place, organic cattle in this case. He likes that. So he doesn't want to change that. In fact, he only wants to improve that.
Yeah.
After we spent $500,000 doing restoration work on that place, he's coming in and he spent like $1 million more. And so all of a sudden, you have an even better property. And those are the kind of people we're trying to sell to, the folks that are going to even take it to the next level.
Okay. So how do buyers find you? So you're redesigning a website right now. So what is that new website going to entail? Is that going to have more of because right now your website is more, I think, geared toward people who are investors and having a presence on the web. But do you ever plan on having more of a, I guess, public-facing face where people can say, hey, what properties do you currently have? Or I have a property. Are you interested in buying it and having that?
So I'm a big believer in specialization and doing what you're really good at and not doing anything else. If someone else has got a competitive advantage, they're better at something, let them do it.
Sure.
And where that translates to your question is I think we're really good at finding distressed properties and restoring them. Mm-hmm. We might be mediocre at reselling them, but we don't have that many of them. So it'd be kind of foolish for someone in Silicon Valley to come and say, hey, I want to buy one of the 4 properties you have today. We only have 4 properties in our portfolio today. At our high, we probably had 12. But still, that is a tiny fraction as compared to the ranch brokers out there.
Right.
They have, maybe 100 different listings on their sites.
Okay.
So we're not trying to compete with them. We don't want to be them.
So those are the people you work with, ranch
we
brokers.
work with them. So in the typical scenario, what we will do is we will find that property, we'll restore it, and then we will work with a ranch broker who, quite frankly, is very similar to the Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley types of brokers or home brokers in the world. They go find the buyer then. Now, we do work with individuals who say, I really want this type of property and I don't see it in your portfolio. Can you help me find it? Now, we do help with that on occasion simply because we see so much. We probably see more properties than anybody in the West. In particular, if that individual is willing to spend some money on restoration work and they're looking for the same thing we are, distressed property, et cetera, obviously we can be very helpful with that because we see so many of those.
Okay. Cool. And you also probably have a network of contacts with people who do the restoration work itself, right? So a lot of contractors and things like that.
Yeah, wonderful individuals who do an amazing job, on time, on budget, fast, et cetera. They've become great friends over time.
Awesome. Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today. This is a fascinating story. And people can find you. Your website again is
Beartoothgroup.com.
Beartoothgroup.com.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks, Pablo. Great spending time with you.
Thank you for listening to Small Business War Stories. If you enjoy the show, share it with a friend, or you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our blog at blog.proven.com. If you have an idea for us, we'd love to hear it. Please email us at podcast@proven.com. See you next time. Small Business War Stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.